Boy of the Pyramids, Chapter 6, at Giza. Very early one morning, not long after the flood began, Coffee ran down the path from the villa to the house where Sarai lived. Sarai, he called as he ran into the courtyard. Sarai, where are you? Here I am, said Sarai, coming out of the house. What's the matter? Coffee had run so fast that he was out of breath. Father is going to Giza, and he says that we may go with him, he panted. Come on. We are going to start right away. When the two children reached the villa, Socyrus was just settling himself in the leader. They climbed in beside him. Nasha was standing in the doorway, waiting to wave goodbye to them. Can't you come too, Mother? Asked Coffee. Not today, answered Nasha. I have too much to do here. You will have to remember everything you see and tell me all about it when you get home. And, she added, take care not to wander off and get lost again. I've had enough to worry over you two lately. We won't, promised the children. And with that, the slaves lifted the leader to their shoulders and set off quickly toward the gate and the temple road. They passed the field where they had so nearly gotten caught in the flood. There was no field there now, for it was all under water. From the dike, it looked as though the whole world was flooded. Villas and villages rose above the water like islands, and dikes stood up like ridges. But everything else was covered with reddish-brown water up to the edge of the yellow cliffs that Coffee and Sarai had tried so hard to reach on the day that they had pretended they were sand people. Sarai looked out over the valley as the slaves carried them swiftly along the pass to the temple and out onto the road to Memphis. Egypt is very flat, isn't it? She asked Coffee. I don't know, is it? Said Coffee. Yes, in our country there were mountains in some places, and the land was all hilly and uneven. What are mountains? Asked Coffee. Why, great high piles of rock that go up and up to the points against the sky. Oh, I know, said Coffee. We have them too, only we call them pyramids. The pharaohs build them for their tombs. Nobody builds mountains, said Sarai. They are just there. How could they be? Began Coffee, but Socyrus interrupted him. Sarai is right, Coffee, he said. There are mountains in her country, and they are not pyramids. They are like the cliffs there at the edge of the desert, only much higher. The copper that we use comes from some of them. Oh, said Coffee. Well, anyway, a pyramid is something like a mountain, isn't it? Well, something like it, admitted Socyrus. You'll see one when we get to Giza, Coffee told Sarai. Socyrus pointed out over the flooded fields. You can see it right now, he said, and there, far off on the edge of the desert to the north, was the tip of the pyramid that Khufu, the pharaoh of Egypt, was building. Does it look like a mountain, Sarai? Asked Coffee eagerly. Not very much from here, answered Sarai. Then, seeing that Coffee was disappointed, she said, but maybe it will when we get closer to it. It does look pretty small right now, said Coffee. It is because it is so large that we can see it from way off here, said Socyrus. No pharaoh has ever built a pyramid as big as the one that Khufu is building. It has taken a long time to build it, hasn't it, Father? Asked Coffee. Yes, indeed. Almost 16 years with 100,000 men working on it every year at flood time. And it is not finished yet, answered Socyrus. But why do they work on it just at flood time? Asked Coffee. Because it is easier to float the stones across the river from the quarries when the land is flooded, answered Socyrus. And besides, the slaves are needed for farming the rest of the year. That's right, said Coffee. I forgot. Some of our slaves went to Giza last week to work on the pyramid, didn't they? Yes, Khufu ordered me to send them, said Socyrus. Even noblemen's slaves were drafted for work on the pyramid of Khufu if he needed them. The leader jogged on and on along the dike, though the city of Memphis, then went to Memphis, then out on the dike again. They began to pass groups of slaves like those from their own farm, going to work on the pyramid. They saw others who were staggering toward Memphis with bandaged arms or legs or bloody backs, worn out and injured from helping to heave the heavy blocks of stone into place. But all of them, tired and ill or well and strong, bowed to the earth as Socyrus's leader passed them. Now the children could see the pyramid rising high above the yellow desert. Its top was smooth and finished, but the lower part was black with workmen. Soon they entered the new city that Khufu had built near his tomb. It was almost as large as Memphis. The streets were alive with people hurrying to and fro, as though what they were doing was very important. They passed the shining new palace and unpainted mud brick houses where the workmen lived. Then they went on out into the country again toward the sandy desert and the Great Pyramid. It loomed higher and higher above them until at last Sarai said, almost in a whisper, "It does look like a mountain, Coffee, a great steep mountain that no one could ever climb." But Coffee did not answer. He was too busy looking. They rounded a corner of the pyramid and came to a standstill in front of its eastern side. Here the stonework was finished almost to the bottom, and the slaves were ready laying the foundations for a T-shaped temple where, after Pharaoh's death, people would come to worship his soul. This was what Socyrus had come to see. Their slaves set down the leader, and followed by Noom, Socyrus walked over to the place where the temple was to be. Coffee and Sarai stayed near the leader. No one paid any attention to them, but they were so busy watching the workmen that they did not mind. From the edge of the valley to the top of the desert cliff, where the pyramid was being built, ran a smooth stone runway. Up the runway, hundreds of slaves with ropes tied around their waists, dragging behind them a wooden sled loaded with great blocks of limestone, were moving. Every time the sled moved, there was a grating, screeching sound. Mingled with that were the groans of slaves, the shouts of the overseers, and the crack of the whips on the slaves' bare backs. The slaves working on the sides of the pyramid groaned too as they pushed the huge stone blocks into place. There were so many people and so much noise that it reminded Coffee of bees swarming about some strange new kind of hive. By the time Socyrus came back, the children were almost dizzy from watching everything and from looking up nearly 500 feet to the top of the great stone pile. They were also bursting with questions. "Father," cried Coffee as soon as he saw Socyrus, "where will they put Khufu's body when he dies? Does it go under the pyramid? How did they get it in there?" "No, not under it. In it," said Socyrus, smiling. "It is hard to believe, isn't it, that there are passageways and rooms inside?" "But how does anyone get in?" asked Coffee. "I don't see a door anywhere." "There is one," Socyrus told him. "Where?" asked both children. "I don't know," answered Socyrus. "That is a secret. Khufu doesn't want anybody to know where the door is, for someone might try to get in and steal his treasures. Someone might even try to steal the jewels from his body after he dies." "But," exclaimed Coffee, "that's a terrible thing to do, isn't it? To steal from the dead?" "Indeed it is," answered Socyrus, "but there are people who do it. We have all built false passageways and false doors in our tombs and have real ones hard to find so that tomb robbers can't get in. Would you like to come with me now to see my tomb?" he added. "I want to find out how much the workmen have done." He said this just as if he were inviting someone to come see his house that he was building. And that is just what he was doing. Every Egyptian nobleman began to build his tomb when he was quite young, for he wanted to have a house all ready for his soul to live in when he died. Since his soul would have to live in this house for a much longer time than his body would live on earth, he was very careful to make the tomb beautiful and to put into it everything that his soul would need to make it happy. There were bright pictures painted on the walls and splendid furniture and jars of food and wine and jewelry and all sorts of treasures. Whatever anyone wanted to have with him after he died, he put it in his tomb. The pharaoh had more things in his tomb than anyone else, but noblemen like Socyrus had many treasures in theirs too. So Socyrus and Coffee and Sarah got into the leader again and set out to see Socyrus's tomb. Off in the desert, near the pyramid, the children could see a great many little stone buildings built in rows, but they were not like pyramids. They were flat topped with sloping sides and a doorway in the middle of one wall. They were called mastabas. These were the tombs of the nobles, and the one that Socyrus was building was quite close to the pyramid, which showed that Khufu liked him very much. No one could build his tomb at Giza unless Khufu told him he could, and only the people he liked best were allowed to build close to the pyramid. They stepped out of the leader at the door and went inside. The workmen must have worked very hard, for the walls of the room were all smoothly plastered, and now a man was painting pictures on them. Across the room from the door was painted, and something that looked like another doorway. Above it was painted Ra, the sun god, with his bright wings, just as the children had seen him in the courtyard of the temple at home. And on either side of this strange door was painted a tall guard with a spear in his hand. "Is that a real door?" asked Sarai. "No," answered Kafe. "That is the door through which Father's soul will go to the world of the dead." They began to walk around the room, looking at the pictures. They were painted in strips on the walls, so there was a room for a great many of them. "Why," said Sarai, "there is your father!" And there on the wall was a painting of Socyrus in his big carved chair, with a tiny slave kneeling before him. "Why has the painter made your father so big and the slave so small?" asked Sarai. "Because Father is a very important person and the slave is not important at all," explained Kafe. "Oh," said Sarai. There were pictures of the villa and pictures of slaves sowing and harvesting, of women working at their looms, and pictures of feasts and pictures of hunts in the papyrus marshes. There were pictures even of the animals, Nep and Soot and Red Boy among them. And there was still one whole wall not yet started, and that gave Kafe an idea. "Father," he called from across the room, "can't the painter put a picture of Sarai and me on that wall?" Socyrus and the painter with whom he was talking smiled. "Perhaps he could," said Socyrus. "I have not yet decided what to put there. I shall have to think about it. It is time for us now to go back to the city. We must have our lunch, and I must see about the things that Khufu is having made for his pyramid." "My," said Kafe as they got into the leader, "this has been an exciting morning." But he never guessed, as he said it, that the afternoon was going to be more exciting still.